gentleman's relish. Barry Flash Foy's reputation precedes him. With his team Gentlemen Smugglers, throughout the 80s this hardy crew were behind some of the most daring and outlandish covert cannabis runs. Some 40 years later, after time served, they're now operating in America's adult use market. But is that any easier than trying to evade 6 different federal agencies? We speak to Barry Foy and Thomas Cutler from Gentlemen Smugglers to find out more.
Hello and welcome to the Lobsterpot podcast. I'm Dave Barton, and today I've got, well, not one, but 2 guests from one company. We have Barry Foy and Thomas Cutler from Gentlemen Smugglers, and boy, do they have some stories to tell us today. Welcome to the show, guys. How you doing?
Good morning or good afternoon for your time.
No, not at all. So tell us a little bit about Gentlemen Smugglers as a brand and where you've come from, because again, I don't want to kind of jump the gun and try and interpret it myself, because it's quite a unique story, and I know it all begins with your own activities, Barry, so please tell us more.
Barry, kick us off.
Well, Gentlemen Smugglers is a name that comes from the media when Ronald Reagan was chasing us around the countryside trying to stop our smuggling activities. The media back then in the early 80s, we had a lot of cocaine wars going on here in the States, a lot of shoot 'em up, bang bang, Tony Montana, Scarface shit going on. And so as it turned out, we were smuggling pot. We weren't carrying too many guns around. Maybe we had a lot of money or something at one time just for security reasons, but it wasn't any of that. The worst thing you would hurt back in those days was a refrigerator. You get the munchies, and man, that was what was on your mind, not how to kill somebody. Like the cocaine
smuggling business was quite tame by comparison back in the day as well.
Well, it was. The cocaine business was in the 80s, started ramping up and becoming very violent, where we, as the media found out as they started to follow our story through what the government was trying to do to us, it kind of gave us that moniker, Gentlemen Smugglers, and it kind of stuck. And because we weren't violent, we weren't trying to hurt anybody, we were just smoking weed and bringing weed and that kind of thing. It wasn't some kind of Scarface kind of thing. So that's how Gentlemen Smugglers got started from a name wise. And of course, that shortly there in the mid 80s, they finally caught up with me and most of the other guys as well. And I did almost 11 years in the penitentiary in Atlanta, Georgia, federal pen, and got out, did a few things. I was a restaurateur for some years, and then met my other partner, who's not on the call with us, Kevin Harrison. And about that same time, I ran into Thomas Cutler as well. And then a few years went by after that. We reconnected on doing a documentary about the Gentlemen Smugglers,
Yes.
put the story to film. And in that process, we also brainstormed and said, well, what about our own cannabis brand? It's legal in a lot of states. Let's talk about that, which we had probably a little more control over. Hollywood's a difficult play, and dealing with those folks out there. So we could control our own destiny a little bit more to our liking. So we created the Gentlemen Smugglers cannabis brand.
Wow.
And
So you've kind of taken that legacy brand from smuggling back in the 80s. And where were you operating out of, and where, and
Well, I started in Florida, South Florida, the Keys, which was a natural spot because it was as close as you could get to the Caribbean, South America, Jamaica, and which was the main producers of cannabis for the States back in the day. Mexico, of course, but Mexican dirt weed was kind of the bottom tier, if you will, in quality. So the Keys were very close to the Caribbean, and so it was a natural place to jump off from. Very easy back in the early 70s. There wasn't any kind of oversight from law enforcement. And then as things ramped up and people got, more smugglers were involved and more people were, it was becoming bigger and bigger, in the sense of, how much was coming into the States. So we gradually moved up the East Coast over the years, but it started in the Keys, and we actually really went up and down the whole East Coast, just depending on what seems to be the right place at the right time. Because as a smuggler, you don't want anybody to ever see or hear what you're doing. So being undercover, under the cover of darkness, so to speak, you wanted a very good remote type of unloading area, that you could, or a place that was paid off that you could unload at. And so as it got more crowded, more people were smuggling, and the Keys, Florida got, kind of overrun by smugglers, if you will, if you could believe that. So we moved up and down the East Coast. And that's kind of how we went for a long time. Of course, we did everything, we procured, packaged, distributed, collected the funds. We were a one-man band.
You were basically the dispensary of the day.
Correct.
The early dispensary.
We're and my last trip to Europe, actually I'll take that back. My last trip to London was because I started using the Channel Islands, Jersey at the time, back in the 70s and 80s. Jersey and the Channel Islands was didn't have a very good tax agreement with the state, so you could take a lot of cash there and deposit it, set up offshore funds. And so that was one of my stops over the years. I would transfer money there, or to open an account. I remember I took a couple of suitcases. Fortunately, back in those days, you could just get on a plane and with a suitcase, and a lot of times you could go through customs and nobody would open your luggage. And fortunately for me, that's how it went down. So we had money stashed all over the world in different accounts, and one thing led to another. 70s led into the 80s, and we had fleets of boats, and things had gone from being a small time adventure to a big time business. And so it kind of was a natural for us to morph into the legal side here in the States, after thinking about it and coming up with some ideas. Thomas Cutler is in the entertainment business and has been for years. So he had a good idea of what to do and how to maybe go about this. And we kind of simultaneously have been working on the documentary, as well as we launched a couple of two and a half years ago in Massachusetts, which ironically is also a state that we smuggled in. So we have a kind of a dual connection there.
As it should be.
Yeah.
Well, I think, Dave, I think what Barry is sort of underplaying too is the magnitude of this. I mean,
absolutely.
The first presidential sting in the war on drugs was Operation Jackpot, which was to take Barry and his crew down. So I love the description of, what started as a sort of small adventure became a big business. That is an understatement. And my stories pale by comparison, because I am not a smuggler. So I lean on Barry to entertain. But that's kind of what drew all of us in, was this rich tapestry of authentic storytelling. I mean, Barry's a terrific raconteur, and his crew have the most colorful names. I mean, Willie the Hog, Miami Tammy, Captain Judy. These aren't made up; they're real. And so, thinking about building a brand, you're building it on the backbone of something real. And I can't think of a lot of brands that do that have that depth, that have that ability to pull multiple characters, multiple POVs, and this crazy epic, 12-year adventure across America and international. And I think that's I'd love Barry to tell you a little bit about some of his international exploits, because he kind of owned the trade here. But Barry, you were in Colombia, Jamaica, Lebanon. I mean, you were all over the world. I mean, you just say in Jersey. But Barry, what was that like when you first you first started going international, did you realize like you had to be going all over the world to procure?
Well, it was kind of like, what were you looking for? I mean, we actually went to Morocco as well. The Moroccans have very good hash. They always had for years. Our connection there was a little shaky, so that's how we ended up going to Lebanon. Even though they were fighting there, if you read the book or the story is, how it all happened. They, everybody laid down their guns long enough to load 30,000 pounds of hash. And then as soon as the boat would, be loaded and everybody had finished and the boat was underway, coming back to the States, the shots rang out again. They were right back at, shooting each other. But that just shows you how intertwined the hash trade has always been in the Middle East.
Yeah.
For instance. But you end up, stretching the imagination. People also, hash has always been well known here in the States. Back in the day, it was, a lot of times, you would have hash and you wouldn't have any cannabis. There was many times that we just couldn't bring enough product. There was always like, I can remember people calling me up going, "Hey man, when you going again? When's the next boat coming in? We're out. We're out." I was like, well, it might be a few more, might be another month. So I don't know what you're going to do. And so it wasn't unusual that sometimes hash would take that place of cannabis, but also distributing the money. You wanted offshore corporations, and the Bahamas were obviously a large offshore entity for us. The Cayman Islands, anywhere. The Dutch were very accepting of cash for accounts and so forth. So it led us to do a lot of things internationally, whether it was the money or the product.
And Barry, that's how you got caught, wasn't it? It was the paper trail, because you were never caught smuggling red-handed, correct? Wasn't it?
Right.
That's how all these 5 agencies, who was the first time, Jackpot was the first time all these agencies had actually worked together, which you think is crazy. Of like, of course, these agencies all work together. Where Interpol,
but like the DEA and things like that.
They had,
US,
they were siloed entities, and so this was the first case where they all worked together. But Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, that's how they got you, right?
Well, they were pissed off for years because they never could catch us doing anything. Yeah, they'd be real close, or we would know what they were doing because we would watch them. We would surveil the police like they would try to surveil us, but we would surveil them, and we knew where they were. A lot of the times we were doing deals. They never could catch us in that form, so they went after, started doing like detective work. Well, where are they spending their money? What are they buying? Who are their girlfriends? Do they have any businesses? And so they started to dig into that using their power of the IRS, subpoenas, intimidation. And eventually they would break people down to cooperate. And so that's really how they brought us down. They didn't bring us down by catching us doing
they just went through more nefarious ways to kind of find out what you're up to.
Capone and tax evasion.
Right.
And so that's how they brought us down, is through those types of ways. And they were relentless, obviously. The feds will catch it, just about anybody that's out there. I don't care who you are. Eventually, you're not going to get away too long from them. They work 24 hours a day.
Well, if Uncle Sam wants his taxes, they're sure as hell going to find you, right?
So that's another way they do. So they would do that kind of research, go to county courthouses, look at real estate transactions.
Wow.
Somebody would give them a name of a corporation. They go dig that up. So that's how they eventually ran us down. And it was just their way of being able to do it, because, to catch a smuggler, a good smuggler, is going to be hard to catch. We're in the open ocean, because we only use boats 95% of the time. Occasionally we would use aircraft, but the aircraft's kind of unreliable. If you look at what's happening in the last 3 or 4 weeks here with aircraft, you'll see, what I'm talking about. Just like I think it was yesterday or day before, I saw where Vince Neil's plane, Motley Crue's plane, his own personal jet with his wife and daughter on board, lost a wheel at landing and ran into another jet and killed a couple of people. That was in Arizona yesterday, I believe. And so jets are falling out the skies. The ones that are really, the last two that have fallen out the skies are both Lear jets. We use those a lot. Of course, that was back in when they were actually producing Lear jets. So mostly boats, mostly sailboats, sometimes ocean going power boats.
Again, it's the ultimate romantic vision. It's kind of like modern day pirates,
more or less, on the ocean. We like sailboats because, you wanted to get from A to B, and you could break down if you had engines. If you had sails, you could probably pretty much always get there, no matter what happened to your engine. So that was our way of thinking. And it worked out well for us. We've been quite a few miles under sail. So that's kind of how we end up getting caught, though. To go back to that was, they ran us down through intimidation, and actually it was conspiracy, because they didn't really catch us doing anything. So we conspired to do things, and they still use that today.
It should be noted that the new company does not have a Learjet, a boat, or a real estate holding.
Not yet.
Not yet. So,
but have you got 5 federal agencies after you?
Luckily not. So no. Yeah.
But I think that's the question. I mean, again, it's fascinating tale. And again, you must have had 15, 20 years of kind of operating in this way throughout the 70s and 80s. And then, fast forward to when you started the brand in the legal market. And again, it's must present different or similar challenges but almost like similar challenges through a different lens, or different challenges through a similar lens. It's operating even in legal states. I mean, you guys are based in South Carolina, aren't you? Which is not legal at the moment. But again, hemp-derived cannabinoids are. So again, it's a real patchwork of legalization, legislation, regulation. How do you figure all that out in this market?
We launched in Massachusetts, and then, as Barry noted, and we are now in New Mexico, Maryland, and we just launched yesterday in New York as well, which we're really, really excited about. But
they're all rec states; they're all adult use.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, hemp is different. I mean, hemp you can sell online in 45 states. There is a battle in a number of states between hemp and marijuana. I mean, really, just if it's in the same state, because there's a thought or an argument that they're kind of cannibalizing each other, which we actually don't buy into. But that's separate. I think it does present a myriad of challenges that Barry will joke that it was easier back in the day running from 5 agencies than it is now in the legal market, and it's just everywhere you turn there's a hiccup, whether it's tax issue, whether it's processing, whether it's testing, whether it is flooding the market and therefore driving down prices, et cetera. So it really is, every day brings a new challenge. I mean, we're thrilled to be in it, and each state is really different. I mean, we see states that are night and day. You look at it from 30,000 feet and you say, oh, you're doing the same thing, but it is an entirely different market. It's an entirely different ecosystem, socioeconomic climate, from everything from pricing to sales to distribution. It's like you're in a different country, and it's a couple states over.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of companies operating in the cannabis space will sort of say these sorts of things. But again, I think the advantage you guys have, it is this authenticity, it is this legacy, it is building this brand based on something that really happens that you can draw from. And I think, again, the more you look at the sort of successful cannabis brands, they do have a sort of legacy of sorts in some regard. And again, I think a lot of the initiatives, like releasing people through for cannabis offenses and things like that, it just makes economic sense because they're the people who know how to run the business, right?
Well, that's social equity, and that's states have tried to incorporate that into their regulations, and who gets licenses and who gets to cultivate and who gets permits and so forth and so on, which it's been kind of sputtering at times how that looks and how that works. But New York State's done a pretty good job with it. Massachusetts done a pretty good job with social equity. And yeah, we're the ones that know how to run the business. I've been in the business for over 50 years. It's hard to find somebody, and I'm trying to put an age on myself, but that's got that kind of lineage and background in all aspects. And so we haven't really used that, so to speak, because again, we're not really plant touching. We have the story and the economics of the cannabis business. If you look at where some of your MSOs were 2 years ago, their price of their stock, Green Thumb, Curio, Curaleaf, Telray, some of your bigger companies, it's gone from $200 to $5. Their value is it's terrible, and so it's just a kind of a example of what the difficulties are to make all this happen. And yeah, it was a lot easier, other than the actual smuggling, the trip itself, and making sure you weren't caught. After that, it was a piece of cake. We made the rules.
I guess the risk was greater, even if the process itself was, was easier to navigate in many respects.
Correct. All parts of it, except for the getting caught, which was, of course, draconian if it happened because of how they treated pot dealers and pot smugglers, pot users back in the day. I mean, today, most of the time, if you're in the States, if you've got a small quantity, that's usually a ticket, a warning ticket or something of that nature. But you can still definitely go to jail for cannabis here in the States. So yes, it was easier back when I was involved in the black market. But we've been able to navigate. Thomas has done a great job helping us navigate through these difficulties in the business, and it's a new business. There's no handbook, there's no Bible on how this is supposed to be done, especially when each state's different. Hopefully, the orange man will come through and he'll make cannabis legal, and like he did with hemp. I think he didn't know what he was creating, obviously, when he passed the farm bill for hemp. But it has caused things to become almost acceptable in states like South Carolina, North Carolina, and some of the southern states where cannabis is illegal. Hemp is, on every corner.
Really? So it's that. I mean, again, I've been to. Where have I been? I've been to, since I've known it to be legal in the US, I've been only really been to Nevada, and again to Las Vegas, and again it's a whole different ball game there. You've got dispensaries on every corner. It's a bit more visible. It's all part of the whole Vegas thing, isn't it? The whole,
Yeah, they've kind of embraced it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and I think that to Barry's point, one of the things we've been from day one, we've been trying to think about, it goes back to story, and it goes back to the origination of the story. This Barry's crew, they're all Southern, they're all Southern boys and girls who started young, and as he said, started with one boat. Pretty soon it became a fleet, and they've got these terrific stories. But the point is, it's a local legend. Like around here, everyone knows Jackpot. Everyone knows Gentlemen Smugglers. And we've been sort of stymied for the past couple of years of how do we, from a brand perspective, how do we lean in and create fandom, so to speak, here? The smugglers are back, this time legally. And so we really leaned in about 6 months ago on the hemp side. And we've got, as we talked about before, Dave, we've got these little, our drink mixers, because it's something that is popular now. It's a different look. It's very true that people are cutting way back on booze. Maybe not in the UK, but certainly in the States. That is a real thing.
There is a kind of move towards it. There's certainly a sort of health conscious. People are looking at kind of alcohol alternatives a bit more. I mean, CBD drinks do exist, but there's lots of energy drinks. I think a lot of people, they're doing a lot more kind of promotion around kind of alcohol free, beers and things like that. So again, we have a big drinking culture here, which again eclipses the cannabis use, I think, by country mile. But at the same time, it's still prevalent here. You still do see cannabis. Yes, most of it's illegal, but again, when you talk about these different form factors, when you talk about beverages, you talk about gummies, all of that is going to make such a huge difference in terms of adoption. And I think that is here already, illicit market, but they're popular. People want to access that. There is demand for these sorts of products,
Yeah,
and again,
there's
into that from your brand.
And there's a lot of people who I think are kind of curious. I mean, we see some really interesting stats on states where we are. People are used to it. They're used to higher dosage, for example. They've been smoking for a while, or vaping, or fill in the blank. But in the Carolinas, where you don't have that, you have a lot of people who are either soccer moms, or they want something that's more functional. And to your point about an adaptogen, it's literal adaptogens, but it's also adapting to a different way of sort of a social tonic. You want to go out there, you want to hang out with people. You may not want to drink as much. You may not want to have a blunt. You want something where you can still have a conversation and all, and it's almost the equivalent of a glass of white wine. I mean, to your point about Britain being a drinking culture, Charleston, where we live, is a heavy drinking culture. But it's really interesting to see there is a change. It's, drinking's not going away, but there is a true interest. And I think we're seeing that across the states. And commensurate to that, you're seeing a way of, you're able to sell online. You're able to kind of control your own brand, your own destiny a little bit, where it's very tricky in the weed space.
But again, you're seeing brands like yours and others that, who are kind of emerging and drawing on the legacy or a passion or something like that, whatever it would be. I feel like that is the way to kind of, people connect with that sort of stuff. I mean, here we have a lot of kind of sort of illicit growers, or conventionally, they've kind of been in the legacy market, making their way into the kind of mainstream medical market. I think I mentioned earlier, there's a rapper here in the UK who, again, he's not in his legacy market per se as an operator, but again, he's a very big fan of recreational cannabis, and he's got his own kind of medical cannabis brand, because that's what you can have here in the UK. And again, things like that, you're starting to see, there's brands like Dank of England, who, traditionally kind of underground operators, but again, they're trying to make their way into the sort of the mainstream. So, it's interesting to see that happening here, where we don't have that kind of, I always see cannabis is very much a kind of North American thing in terms culturally, I think more so than it is in Europe and certainly in the UK. But I think, again, we're still seeing move towards that. People are leaning into, it's like, oh, that's happening over in the US. Why can't we have things like that here? Why have they got these kind of, nice sort of product categories and things like that? And we're, even in the medical market, sort of still relying on, things that are either heavily pharmaceutical, or we're just, good old fashioned flower, which is great. Don't get me wrong, but that's not necessarily what's going to be the tipping point to get the soccer mum demographic on board with it, for example, And I think that's interesting to learn from companies like yourselves who are doing those sorts of things and sort of saying, okay, right, how do we build on that legacy and create these new products and, find new audiences, find new customers? And I think that's the way forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, Barry is a great quote of, when the feds are after you, they go left, you go right, that kind of thing. It's sort of in this business, you have to be nimble, and you have to be able to pivot pretty quickly. And we've definitely seen that in multiple states and with new SKUs. And it's it's an education. You're educating people, your customers about a new product, et cetera, that may be different from what they're used to. And then you're also, you may not be an expert internally on packaging, but you better become one pretty quickly. So these challenges, they're fun too. Look, at the end of the day, it's an exciting, it's a roller coaster for sure, but it's exciting.
Yeah, it's much more involved in the black market. The black market's easy, especially today in the States, because there's really no smuggling. If in the black market, you ride out to California and get what you want and ride back to New York, and as long as you make it back to New York, you're in good shape. And that's it. You don't have to come by water or come by air. You can just drive your car around, and as long as that it's much easier today in the black market than it was having to go through what we went through and travel, thousands of miles over the ocean. So either way, it's better today. It's just going to be a slow grind, and people's attitudes have to change. We were told since the 30s of how bad cannabis was.
Mm-hmm.
For all the way up until the 90s and the 2000. It's just been hammered home for 80 years, and it takes a minute to get through that. And now you have the government involved, and research and politicians, and now it just gets sticky, and it's like a fly trap, and it's wade through it, and it's slow, and it'll happen. But again, the government's always been very oppressive when it comes to drugs in general. Instead of concentrating on things like fentanyl, which they should do today, they still have a reason to go after people who are engaging in cannabis, which is just the opposite of what they should be doing. But it takes time to get over those years of being held down.
Patchwork of regulations, kind of, state by state, obviously doesn't help, because it doesn't make it easy. But then how do you kind of enforce that on, if someone wants to drive, from one legal state to an illegal state or whatever, then they're not setting up sort of blockades, at the state line.
No.
So again, it just doesn't make any sense to kind of have that in place. But again, similar in Europe, I guess, with the EU, and you can travel between different countries, and you might buy something in Germany and take it into Netherlands, and where it's not technically legal, but they'll probably turn a blind eye to it, but then take it to France, and if you get caught there, probably a whole different ball game. It doesn't create a particularly, it's still a very turbulent environment in terms of regulations and what people are doing. But
there are people who are still incarcerated for this. We do a lot of work with Last Prisoner Project. Obviously, Barry's very involved because of his story. We just had a meeting with them last week, and we were saying, listen, we want to do more in the Carolinas because obviously that's our home and it makes sense. They said they're focused on other places from an incarceration standpoint, and working with inmates to get them out where it's going to be an easier path to whether it's expungement or just release, etc. And so even there, you have certain states that are still pretty draconian, and others that are more flexible. I wouldn't say they're, it's a walk in the park, but everything is piecemeal.
Yes, but that's it. But what are your kind of hopes for sort of this year? Do you feel like, we're kind of, right now, time of recording, we're sort of middle of February 2025. Do you think this is the year that there's going to be federal legalization in the US? Or what do you think will happen if not that? We talked about the descheduling a while back, wasn't there? But still in motion. What do you think is going to happen? Do you think it's going to get easier?
Me personally,
no.
As long as the government's involved and they make it difficult to, try to find two people that can agree on something, and the government is difficult, much less a body of a couple of hundred to pass laws, I think that they're going to just drag their feet. It's going to be a very, very slow process. They've already delayed rescheduling. They've already tried to change judges that are overseeing the rescheduling. So it's always these little tricks that politicians play that are on the side of, we really don't think this is a good idea, so we're going to try to put a spoke in the wheels, so to speak, and slow this whole process down. So I think that's what we're going to deal with. It's going to be, I don't think this year, the only person that can make that happen is the orange man. If he snaps his fingers and said, all right, guys, it's legal now, just like he did with the farm.
That can happen.
That can happen.
And he could look at it from if you were going to say, put on your sort of libertarian hat, he'd say, let's just look at it from a tax standpoint. But you couple that then with, this is not to do a deep dive on politics, but with a base that may be more conservative, and that gets more challenging. So I I came into January more optimistic, and I'm with Barry now. I'm a little bit like, I don't think this is going to
happen. Now, again, when we had our new government sort of take in sort of November time, it was kind of like, well, they're more of a left-leaning government. But even though, and again, I hear from people who are involved in like parliamentary committees and things like that, you know, you'll get broad support internally from people individually, but no one will stand on the podium and say, yeah, we're going to back a bill to legalize it, because they just can't.
Sometimes it's not politically smart to do that. Depends on your constituents and where you're located in the country, who you represent, how liberal or how conservative they are. So we'll just have to wait and see. We continue to explore new avenues where we can, and work around the regulations where we can, and try to think creatively on what we can do to, you know, be in the market and create SKUs and products that are quality and consistently going to be there for the consumer. You know, and a brand, and we think, as again, we are a brand that one day, here not too long in the future, I think a couple of years from now, 2 or 3, the brands that are around that have legacy and have a story and become well known with consistency and quality are going to be the ones that are going to survive. Because just because you've got a romantic idea you're going to come into the cannabis business, beware. It's difficult. It takes a lot of work. I'm lucky to be associated with Kevin Harrison and Thomas and some of our other partners that we sideline with. And so it takes a really good team and a very smart approach to make these things happen, especially as a brand, and which I think we're positioned to move forward here in the coming years and really be something special from a standpoint of, you know, being in the business for such a period of time. Not many people can say they've been in the business for 50 years.
No, indeed. But again, I think that puts you in a position of strength. And I think in terms of launching in new markets and things like that, and opening the product, you know, range, or, you know, getting into new SKUs and things like that, I feel like it's an opportunity. And again, if you've got something that ties you back to the industry authentically, I really believe that's what people buy into, when from a consumer perspective, because we all buy stories, we all buy, oh, I really like this brand, and you think, well, why do I like this brand? And you think, okay, well, because ... and all of a sudden you've got that kind of perspective on, you know, there's something here that is good quality, gives me that kind of connection to something else that, you know, it's not just transactional, is it? But no, it's fascinating stuff, and I wish you guys all the best with it all. And no, I just want to say thanks very much for coming on the show, and look forward to seeing what you guys do next. So best of luck with it all, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you, and we'd love to be in London one day. The Gentlemen Smugglers.
To come over, yeah, we'll have to have words. We'll talk.
All right.
All right. Best guys, thanks for coming on. Cheers.
Thank you.